I just spent nearly a week in France, a week after the infamous Abaya ban has come into legislation by this guy. What is the Abaya ban, you may ask? France, the land of liberté, now has literally banned schoolgirls to wear an abaya to school, which is usually the long robe that our Muslim sisters wear. The hijab was already banned in 2004, but now somehow even this piece of clothing is a threat to society.
Public schools must, at any cost, perhaps more than any other institution, be protected from religious indoctrination or from the refusal of our most important common rules.
Ridiculous? Yeah, it is. So I took the Eurostar there and got to follow brothers around their daily life to give you a glimpse of what it's like there now, today, for a group of people who are essentially marginalized because of their faith. This video is quite different to my usual content, so I have to put a disclaimer that everything I do say in this video is my own personal experiences. So this is a topic that's very close to my heart, so don't miss it. First of all, some context on why you're about to get a true, real perspective on life out there. 10 years in the making, in fact. You may have seen in some of my videos that I do speak French. That's because I was born and brought up there. In fact, still got my French passport. I grew up in a small seaside town called Dieppe, growing up there in France until the age of 10. And you know what? Life was pretty good. I mean, as a 10-year-old, what else do you want apart from being able to be next to the seaside, ride around in your bike, go to school, have a loving family? But now on reflection, years later, some of the things that I thought was very normal growing up in France, I'm having second thoughts about. First of all, the good. So I was obviously in a small town, not in a major city as such. So even though my mom was the only person that was headscarfed in the town, alhamdulillah, during the 10 years I was there, I never saw her face any issues due to the headscarf. Number two, I didn't actually know what Jummah, Friday prayers, was until I moved to the UK at the age of 10. That's because there was no mosques around. The closest mosque was actually in the next town. Third of all, and this might shock you a little bit, often you get teased by kids, right? And me getting called a dirty Arab is usually, un sale arabe in French, as we say. I thought that was pretty normal. Isn't that, how you get teased? Is it though? And then fourthly, halal meat. So the concept of eating out at a restaurant is not something I was familiar with for the first 10 years of my life because of course there was no halal food around me. And so if we wanted to eat halal at home, my father would actually go to the farm that was in just outside town and do the qurbani himself, the slaughter himself. Pretty cool experience. But of course, some of the things that we do take for granted here in the UK, for example, of course it has improved since then. We're talking about the early 2000s. But some things have remained, and in such, some things have gotten worse. In the last couple of years, we actually did go back to Dieppe. And we went to a local bank there. We were greeted by someone at the reception who was of African descent. And I still remember the question he asked me. He said, look, does me moving there, would I be able to get a better job than just being a receptionist even though I'm black? Now, what a crazy question to say, right? Feeling like just because you're a different culture, a different color, a different religion, that you are somehow disadvantaged. But the reality is that that's life out there. It's accepted that just because you may wear the scarf, just because you may have a different religion, just because you don't conform to the secular norms of what the French person is, you are disadvantaged. But enough of being here. Let's go to Paris.
Safety and security.
This is my childhood best friend Salman, who has come to pick me up on Friday morning. We're in the suburbs of Paris, where there is a high population of Muslims, so there are a number of mosques around for us to choose from. We're going to his favourite one. It's absolutely boiling this week in France with 35 degrees heat, so I'm glad we took his scooter. Also, to avoid praying outside in the heat, we came early. It's a beautiful mosque, as you can see. However, I wasn't allowed to actually take a lot of footage. The thing, Muslims value the little freedom to exercise their faith that they have left, like praying in congregation. I mean, look at the numbers and the diversity of our brothers here at Friday Prayers. Fortunately, the mentality is such that any attention you bring to yourself can only be harmful. Let's appreciate the little that we do have and continue life as is. Or even when it comes to collecting donations. Of course, we know that Muslims love to donate. They're very generous. I think in the UK, Muslims are the biggest donators to causes. But in France, you can't actually collect donations outside of the mosque boundary. So let's say you stood just outside the gates with a bucket to collect for, let's say, the Moroccan earthquake that's just happened. You cannot do that. I love the brotherhood, the same I experienced anywhere in the world. After Jummah, we went downstairs and the brothers invited me to join them for lunch. Alhamdulillah, things have changed a lot since the early 2000s. My particular case was that I was in a small town, and even in that small town there are a couple of kebab places that have propped up. But in Paris, actually in the suburbs of Paris, our Moroccan, Algerian brothers have taken fast food to another level. In fact, things like Bims in the UK, if you know, like the Halal McDonald's, it's actually originated from France. But I've got another video specifically dedicated on the best fast food there, so look out for that one. I take a lot of inspiration for my restaurant here in London, Simply Smashed, from my childhood in France. The sauces, the fast food that the brothers over there have managed to create, I'm trying to bring that here in London via Simply Smashed. So we're just riding around here in the banlieue, in the suburbs of Paris, and we're actually going past a couple of schools at school time. And it's really sad. You can actually see our sisters basically coming out of the school gates and essentially putting on the hijab again. That's the state of life here, unfortunately. But you do see, as you walk around, a lot of our sisters in hijabs. Despite this, may Allah, make them stronger, may Allah protect them because of the efforts they're putting in. But the thing with loose clothing as well, as we've seen on the news, even loose clothing is not being allowed. So it's Friday night, and you know where all the brothers go Friday night? It's of course to play some football. So I've come here to a five-a-side with a lot of the brothers from the community. We're gonna play some football, and then afterwards I'm gonna ask them some questions for you guys about what it's like to be a Muslim in this environment. Assalamu alaikum. And at Maghrib, we all paused, about 20 of us, to publicly pray in the middle of the pitch. Just like we do every week here in London. Now, I had the view that you couldn't do that. And in fact, you can't do that per se, normally. But you have to remember that in this particular day in the life with Salman, I was in the suburbs of Paris. If you are in Paris, in the center of Paris, you can't just stop and pray somewhere without potentially getting removed by the police, if not by passerbys.
If you cannot pray Salah, you are the weakest person I've ever met. And I'll say that to your face. Wallahi. Weak, bruv. You're a weakling. You're a boy.
And you want to do it in school somewhere, forget about it. Assalamu alaikum, Ryan. You were born here.
Yeah, I was born here, yeah.
What do you do at the moment?
Yeah, I'm currently working for HSBC in a bank. So I'm working as a financial advisor.
Et je vais demander en français maintenant. Comment tu as fait pour avoir la conversation avec ton manager pour lui dire que la prière c'est important pour toi?
Tu sais, HSBC déjà, c'est une entreprise, c'est une banque anglaise. Donc on est dans les normes anglaises aussi un tout petit peu. Donc on est autorisé à prier comme on le souhaite. Ils ne dénigrent pas la prière. J'ai dû forcer un tout petit peu parce que tu sais qu'en France c'est pas évident de prier partout. Et grâce à Allah, je réussis à prier au moins 3 fois par jour, Inch'Allah, au travail.
Ok, alhamdulillah. Ils t'ont donné une petite place ou
J'ai mon bureau en France.
D'accord. Mais si t'aurais une fille, tu ferais quoi alors?
Moi déjà, je ne serais pas resté en France à cause de tout cela.
Tu voudrais partir?
Je me serais expatrié peut-être en Angleterre, vu que c'est le pays le plus proche.
Inch'Allah.
On peut prier, on peut pratiquer l'islam.
Inch'Allah. Allez, merci beaucoup. Assalamu alaikum. So yeah, that was Brian. As I was mentioning, you have to have some French names to get jobs, unfortunately, here. And if you're wondering, how can you sell yourself out having a French name, you have to understand that it's completely different out there. If it's a small thing as you having also a French name that you use in the public corporate setting, that's the difference between you having a job, therefore being able to provide for your family. You won't think twice about it. It's either that or be unemployed. We ended the night with a fantastic munch with the brothers. And while sitting down with them, here's some further things I've learned. In the suburbs of Paris, there now you see a lot of mosques around, alhamdulillah. You can do your prayers, there's classes, there's Islamic classes, there's madrasas, there's halal meat all of that is available, alhamdulillah, you can live. But I guess the difference is the socio-economic state of the Muslims there. It's mostly workers. It's people that's, cab drivers, it's the people working in the local grocery shops, in the bakeries. A very few of them are in sort of the more corporate jobs, the more, say, higher paid jobs that you wouldn't think twice about here in the UK. The time freedom that they have to engage in further dawah activities that we take for granted here. Eid in the park, say. I mean, we've got the Halal Food Festival here, literally at the end of this week. The event centered around halal food. There's no way you can have that in France, of course. So here we start seeing some subtle differences between life here and life in France. So now we come to the main issue at hand, which is the Abaya, the Hijab. What about your children that you're going to be putting to school? Is Hijrah, moving away from France, mandatory? Look, I am not a scholar, and as I said, this is on my own personal experiences. But what I did find in that group of brothers was one of them who was a history teacher in an Islamic college. Now hold on, Islamic college? Yep. So that's something that not many people know. What are the options in terms of schooling? So I asked this brother who's a history teacher, what would you do if you had a daughter? So he explained, number one, if you had the means, it would be hijrah. Now, benefits and disadvantages. Benefit is you can go anywhere you want. Where would you go? That's another question. But also you lose some of your comforts that you may have, but mainly can you afford it? If hijrah isn't possible, then he would opt for an Islamic school or college. There are a number of them available in the suburbs of Paris, in other cities as well, which essentially is the same as having madrasas here, the Islamic schools you have here. The problem is, yes, funds is one, but beyond funds, there's just not enough of them. And even in the college that he's working at, there's a long hundreds of people in the queue. So okay, if Islamic schooling isn't available, then actually another thing that took me by surprise, homeschooling is still allowed. Now there's a lot of scrutiny. We've seen on the news that the state is also trying to stop homeschooling. But then, as I mentioned, what is the socio-economic state of our Muslim brothers and sisters over there? Usually both husband and wife are working. They don't have a lot of time, nor maybe potentially the education, because they're immigrants themselves, to be able to provide that education to their kids such that when they're getting regular visits by the state, they're able to show the paperwork is the correct education. Unfortunately, that's not where things are at the moment. Look at London. Look at the UK, where diversity is in fact embraced. Now, of course, I'm not saying the UK has no issues. Of course it has issues. I've always felt that if I put in the effort in school, at work, I can achieve what the rest can achieve. And there's mosques everywhere. Alhamdulillah, if there's one thing you should take from this video is appreciate, be grateful for these things that you have. Because for our brothers and sisters in other places, especially like France, they don't have these. Therefore, it's our duty here to make the most out of these freedoms, to show the world what hardworking contributors to society Muslims are. We need to go above and beyond for community cohesion and looking after our neighbors. And through that, show the world, and in particular France, that indeed marginalizing a minority and putting a veil on the actual failures of society can only lead to its failure.